Hello there, and welcome. Tonight we are stepping into one of the strangest mysteries in all of human history. Not a legend, not a myth, but a scientific ghost story that happens to be completely real. We are talking about an entire species of human beings that walked this earth, lived full lives, loved, suffered, and shaped our very DNA. And yet, we have almost never seen them. No complete skeleton, no clear picture of their faces, barely a handful of bones scattered across a century of searching. They are called the Denisovans, and they are the most mysterious cousins we never knew we had. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture archaeologists 100,000 years from now digging through the ruins of our civilization. They find fragments, pieces of bone, scraps of evidence that 7 billion people once lived here. But instead of museums full of artifacts and cities full of remains, all they discover is a single finger bone, a few teeth, and a jawbone. From that, they have to reconstruct everything. What we looked like, where we lived, how we survived. That is the challenge scientists face with the Denisovans, an entire branch of humanity reduced to whispers in our genome and a few precious fragments that refuse to give up their secrets easily. This is not a story told from a distance with neat answers and clear timelines. This is a detective story still unfolding where every new discovery raises 10 new questions. It is the tale of ghost humans who left barely a trace in the ground but left an indelible mark in the blood of millions of people alive today. So if you are ready, set aside what you think you know about human evolution. Forget the simple linear march from ape to modern human. The truth is far stranger, far messier, and infinitely more fascinating, because the Denisovans force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. For most of human history, we were not alone, and the others who walked beside us have not vanished completely. They live on, hidden in plain sight in the very cells of our bodies. Before we can understand the mystery of the Denisovans, we need to go back, not to when they lived, but to the moment we discovered they had existed at all. Because unlike Neanderthals, whose bones had been studied for over a century, the Denisovans appeared seemingly out of nowhere. One day, they did not exist in our understanding of human history. The next day, they did, and it all began with a single finger bone in a cave in Siberia. The year was 2008. A team of Russian archaeologists was working in Denisova Cave, a remote site in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. The cave had been occupied on and off for hundreds of thousands of years, a shelter used by various groups of ancient humans as they moved through the harsh landscape. It was not an unusual sight. Caves like this dot the archaeological record across Eurasia, each one a time capsule of stone tools, animal bones, and ash from long-dead fires. But this cave was about to rewrite everything we thought we knew. Among the sediment and debris, researchers found a small fragment of a finger bone. It was tiny, unimpressive, the kind of thing that could easily be overlooked. The bone belonged to a child, a young girl who had died tens of thousands of years ago. In any other context, it might have been catalogued as another Neanderthal or early modern human remain. But when scientists extracted DNA from that finger bone and ran it through their analysis, something impossible appeared in the results. The DNA did not match modern humans. It did not match Neanderthals either, even though Neanderthal remains had been found in the same cave. This was something else entirely, a third lineage, a ghost population that had somehow remained invisible to decades of fossil hunting and archaeological excavation. The scientific community was stunned. It was as if someone had discovered a new colour, something that should not exist within the framework everyone had agreed upon. They named this new group after the cave where they were found Denisovans. And in the years that followed, As more DNA was extracted from a handful of additional teeth and bone fragments, the picture that emerged was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. These were not some distant evolutionary dead end that vanished without a trace. These were successful, adaptable humans who had ranged across vast stretches of Asia. They had interbred with our ancestors. Their genes still flow through the veins of billions of people today, particularly in Oceania, Southeast Asia, and even among some Native American populations. But here is where the mystery deepens into something almost supernatural. Despite their genetic legacy, despite the fact that we carry pieces of them inside us, we have almost no idea what they looked like. The finger bone gives us DNA, but tells us nothing about height, build, or facial features. The teeth are large, larger than those of modern humans or Neanderthals, with unusual root structures. But teeth alone cannot reconstruct a face. A partial jawbone discovered in 2019 on the Tibetan Plateau, the first Denisovan fossil found outside Denisova Cave, is massive and robust. It suggests a powerfully built individual with features unlike anything walking the earth today. But it is still just a jawbone. From these fragments, scientists have attempted to do the impossible. Using the DNA, they have tried to predict what Denisovans might have looked like by analysing which genes were active and how they might have shaped physical traits. The results are haunting. Wide faces, broad noses, large teeth, prominent brows. Features that seem both human and alien at the same time. But these are educated guesses, shadows cast by genetic data. No one truly knows. If a Denisovan walked past you on the street, would you recognise them as different? Would they look monstrous, or would they simply seem like a person from a lineage you had never encountered? We may never know. What we do know is that they were not primitive. They made tools. They survived in some of the harshest environments on Earth, from the freezing mountains of Siberia to the high-altitude plateaus of Tibet. They endured ice ages and droughts, adapted to forests and open grasslands. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived, and then they vanished, leaving behind only whispers in the genetic code and a few bone fragments that refuse to tell the whole story. This is the paradox of the Denisovans. They are everywhere and nowhere. Invisible in the ground, undeniable in our blood. The discovery of the Denisovans did more than add a new name to the human family tree. It shattered the simple story we had been telling ourselves about human evolution. For generations, the narrative was clean. Humans evolved in Africa, migrated out into the world, and replaced everyone they encountered. Neanderthals were a side branch that went extinct. We were the sole survivors, the last humans standing. The Denisovans made that story impossible to maintain, because once scientists began looking for Denisovan DNA in modern human populations, they found it everywhere, not evenly distributed but present in significant amounts across Asia and Oceania. People in Papua New Guinea carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, a percentage so high it suggests not a single interbreeding event, but repeated contact over thousands of years. Aboriginal Australians, Melanesians, some populations in the Philippines and Southeast Asia all carry traces of these ghost humans. Even people far from Asia, including some Native American groups, have small amounts of Denisovan ancestry. This meant something profound. Our ancestors did not simply replace the humans they encountered. They interbred with them. They had children together. Those children survived, thrived, and passed on a mixture of genes that combined the strengths of multiple human lineages. In some cases, those Denisovan genes provided critical advantages. The clearest example is found in Tibetans. Living at high altitude is brutal on the human body. The air is thin, oxygen is scarce, and without specific adaptations, people suffer from altitude sickness, reduced fertility, and a host of other problems. Yet Tibetans have lived on the high plateau for thousands of years, their bodies uniquely suited to an environment that would cripple most other populations. The secret is in their DNA. A gene called EPAS1, which regulates red blood cell production and oxygen efficiency, is found in an unusual form in Tibetans. This variant allows them to thrive at elevations where others struggle to survive. Where did this gene come from? The answer is written in the genetic code. It is Denisovan. Tens of thousands of years ago, when modern humans moved into the highlands of Asia, they encountered Denisovans who had already adapted to the altitude. Through interbreeding, that adaptation was passed on. The Denisovans are extinct, but their gift of survival lives on in every Tibetan who climbs the mountains without gasping for breath. It is evolution in action, a blending of lineages that made modern humans more adaptable than either group could have been alone. But the EPAS1 gene is not the only Denisovan contribution. Research suggests their DNA may also play a role in immune system function, helping some populations fight off diseases. Other Denisovan genes are linked to metabolism, skin pigmentation, and even brain development. These were not random leftovers. They were advantageous traits that natural selection preserved because they helped people survive. In a very real sense, the Denisovans are not gone. They are still here, woven into the fabric of human diversity. Yet this raises an uncomfortable question. If they were so successful, if their genes were valuable enough to persist for tens of thousands of years, why did they disappear as a distinct group? Why are there no Denisovans left walking the earth today? The answer is complicated, and scientists are still piecing it together, but the evidence suggests it was not a single catastrophic event. It was something slower, more insidious. Absorption. Imagine two groups of humans living in the same region. They compete for resources, but they also cooperate. They trade, they form alliances, and occasionally they have children together over generations. The genetic boundaries between the groups blur. If one group is larger, more numerous, or more adaptable in a changing environment, the smaller group slowly disappears. Not through violence, though that surely happened at times, but through integration. Their genes persist, but their distinct identity fades. This is likely what happened to the Denisovans. They did not vanish in a sudden extinction event. They were absorbed, interbred into modern human populations until there were no pure Denisovans left. In some regions, this process might have been peaceful. In others, it may have been driven by competition and conflict. We will never know the full story because the Denisovans left no written records, no art we can definitively attribute to them, no clear graves that tell us how they mourned their dead. What we are left with is a genetic shadow, a trace of something that once was. And that shadow is vast. The geographic range suggested by Denisovan DNA is staggering. From Siberia in the north to Southeast Asia in the south, from the Tibetan plateau to the islands of Oceania, they were everywhere. But their fossils are not. This is the central mystery that keeps scientists awake at night. How can a population so widespread, so successful, leave so little physical evidence behind? There are theories, of course. Perhaps Denisovans lived in environments where fossilization is rare. Tropical forests, for instance, are terrible for preserving bones. The heat, humidity, and acidic soil break down organic material quickly. If Denisovans favored these regions, their remains would have rotted away long ago, leaving nothing for archaeologists to find. Another possibility is that we simply have not looked in the right places yet. The world is vast, and only a tiny fraction of it has been excavated. Denisovan fossils could be sitting in caves across Asia, waiting to be discovered. Or perhaps the Denisovans themselves were different in ways we do not yet understand. Maybe their burial practices, their population density, or their way of life made fossilization less likely. Every human group has its own customs, and those customs affect what survives in the archaeological record. If Denisovans did not bury their dead in caves, if they practiced sky burial or cremation or some other method that left no bones behind, we would never find them no matter how hard we searched. The frustrating reality is that we are trying to reconstruct an entire species from fragments so small they would fit in the palm of your hand. And yet, those fragments have already revolutionized our understanding of human history. They have proven that our family tree is not a straight line, but a tangled web of interbreeding and divergence. They have shown that evolution is not a process of simple replacement, but one of mixture and adaptation. And they have reminded us that for most of our history, we were not the only humans on this planet. The Denisovans walked the same earth we walk today. They looked up at the same stars, felt the same cold winds, and struggled to survive in a world that offered no guarantees. And though we may never see their faces or hear their voices, we carry them with us. In our genes, in our adaptations, in the very traits that make some of us uniquely suited to the places we call home. They are ghosts, yes. But they are ghosts that refuse to fade completely. To understand where the Denisovans lived, we have to rely on more than just the few bones we have found. We have to follow the genetic breadcrumbs they left behind in modern human populations and piece together a map from the echoes in our DNA. What emerges is a portrait of a people who were not confined to a single valley or isolated cave, but who ranged across one of the largest and most diverse regions on Earth. From the frozen mountains of Siberia to the steaming jungles of Southeast Asia, from the thin air of the Tibetan Plateau to the islands of the Pacific, the Denisovans were everywhere. And yet they remain invisible. Start with Denisova Cave itself, the place that gave them their name. Nestled in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, this cave sits in one of the harshest environments imaginable. Winters are brutal, with temperatures plunging far below freezing. Summers are short and unpredictable. Survival here required not just resilience but ingenuity, the ability to make fire, craft warm clothing, and hunt in conditions that would kill an unprepared human within hours. The cave itself is massive, a complex of chambers and tunnels that provided shelter for thousands of years. Archaeological layers show that it was occupied by multiple groups over time. Neanderthals lived there, modern humans lived there, and Denisovans lived there, sometimes at the same time. DNA extracted from the sediment of the cave floor has revealed something astonishing. All three groups were present, their genetic material mingling in the dirt, evidence of a time when multiple species of human coexisted in the same small space. But Denisova Cave is just the beginning. In 2019, researchers announced the discovery of a Denisovan jawbone in Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau, over 1,500 miles south of the original site. This was a game changer. It proved that Denisovans were not confined to Siberia. They had spread far beyond the Altai Mountains, adapting to environments radically different from the frozen north. The Tibetan Plateau sits at an average elevation of over 14,000 feet. The air is thin, the climate extreme, and survival requires specialized adaptations that most humans simply do not have. The jawbone itself is a marvel. It is large, far more robust than a modern human jaw, with teeth that are almost archaic in their size and structure. But it is the location that matters most. This fossil proves that Denisovans were living at high altitude at least 160,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived in the region. They were not just passing through, they were thriving, adapting, and leaving behind genetic gifts that would one day help their descendants survive in the same unforgiving landscape. From Tibet, the trail grows fainter but no less compelling. Genetic evidence suggests Denisovans lived throughout East Asia and Southeast Asia. Populations in the Philippines, particularly the Ita-Magbukon people, carry some of the highest levels of Denisovan DNA outside of Oceania. This suggests long-term contact, repeated interbreeding, and a Denisovan presence that stretched across island chains and tropical forests. But where are the bones? Where are the stone tools, the campsites, the undeniable physical proof? The answer may lie in the environment itself. Tropical and subtropical regions are notoriously poor for fossil preservation. The combination of heat, humidity, and acidic soil destroys organic material at an accelerated rate. Bones that might survive for tens of thousands of years in a dry cave disintegrate in a rainforest within centuries. If Denisovans favoured these regions, and the genetic data suggests they did, then the lack of fossils is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of the limits of archaeology. Then there is Oceania, where the Denisovan legacy is strongest. People in Papua New Guinea, Aboriginal Australians, and Melanesians carry Denisovan DNA at levels that cannot be explained by a single ancient encounter. This was sustained contact, possibly over thousands of years, but here is the puzzle. How did Denisovans reach these islands? The waters between mainland Asia and Oceania are vast, and during the ice ages when sea levels were lower, some land bridges existed, but not all of them. To reach some of these islands would have required watercraft, deliberate navigation, and a level of planning that we typically associate only with modern humans. Did Denisovans build boats? Did they raft across open ocean? Or did they simply follow coastlines during periods of low sea level, moving island to island over generations until they reached the furthest edges of the Pacific? We do not know. What we do know is that their genes made it there, which means they did too. And in doing so, they left a legacy that shaped the people of Oceania in ways we are only beginning to understand. The lack of fossils has forced scientists to get creative. Instead of relying solely on bones, they have turned to environmental DNA, genetic material that leaches into soil and sediment and can persist for tens of thousands of years. By analysing dirt from cave floors, riverbeds, and ancient campsites, researchers can detect the presence of Denisovans even when no bones remain. This technique has already expanded the known range of Denisovans and will likely continue to reveal new sites in the years to come. But even with these advances, the Denisovans remain frustratingly elusive. Every discovery raises more questions than it answers. Why are there so few fossils? Were Denisovan populations small and scattered? Or were they numerous but living in places where preservation was unlikely? Did they have burial customs that left no archaeological trace? Or is it simply bad luck, a quirk of geology and time that has erased most of the evidence? What is clear is that the Denisovans were not a marginal group clinging to survival in a single isolated pocket. They were widespread, successful, and adaptable. They conquered climates ranging from subarctic tundra to tropical islands. They interbred with at least 2 other human species, modern humans and Neanderthals, and possibly more. They left genetic signatures that persist in modern populations across half the globe, and yet they did so while leaving behind almost no physical trace. This is what makes them ghost humans. Not because they were mythical or imaginary, but because they moved through history like shadows, leaving only the faintest impressions. We know they were there. because we can see the marks they left in our DNA. We can trace their movements through the genes of people alive today. But the people themselves, the faces, the voices, the lives they lived remain just out of reach. Somewhere out there in a cave not yet discovered or a riverbed not yet excavated, there may be more Denisovan fossils waiting, a skull, a pelvis, a complete skeleton that could finally put a face to the genetic ghost. Until that day comes, we are left with the tantalizing evidence we have. A finger bone, a few teeth, a massive jawbone, and the genetic legacy woven into millions of living people. It is not enough to satisfy our curiosity, but it is enough to know that they were real, that they walked this earth, and that they were far more important to our story than anyone could have imagined. And as we trace their movements across the ancient world, one question looms larger than all the rest. If they were so successful, so adaptable, so genetically fit that their DNA was worth preserving, why did they disappear? What happened to the Denisovans? The extinction of the Denisovans is not a mystery in the traditional sense. There was no sudden cataclysm, no meteor strike or volcanic eruption that wiped them out in a single event. Their disappearance was slow, quiet, and in many ways more haunting than a dramatic end. They faded, not because they were weak, but because they were absorbed into something larger, and in that absorption they lost their identity even as their genes survived. To understand what happened, we need to think about how humans have always interacted when different groups meet. Sometimes there is conflict, violence, and competition for resources. Other times there is cooperation, trade, and the formation of alliances. And very often there is interbreeding. When two groups of humans live in proximity, share resources, and face common threats, the boundaries between them blur. Children are born who belong to both groups and to neither. Over generations, distinct populations merge into one. This is almost certainly what happened to the Denisovans. As modern humans spread out of Africa and moved into Asia, they encountered populations that had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals in the west, Denisovans in the east, and possibly other groups we have not yet identified. These were not uninhabited lands waiting to be claimed. They were occupied, and the people living there were just as human, just as intelligent, and just as capable as the newcomers. At first, contact may have been rare. Small bands of modern humans moving through Denisovan territory or vice versa. Encounters could have been tense, even hostile. Resources were limited, and competition for food, shelter, and hunting grounds was fierce. But not all encounters ended in violence. Some must have ended in cooperation, shared hunts, shared fires, and eventually shared lives. We know this happened because the genetic evidence is undeniable. Modern humans carry Denisovan DNA, which means our ancestors did not just fight them or avoid them. They had children with them, and those children survived long enough to have children of their own, passing on a blend of genetic material that combined traits from both lineages. In some cases, those Denisovan traits were advantageous enough that natural selection favored them, keeping them in the gene pool long after the Denisovans themselves had vanished as a distinct group. But interbreeding alone does not explain extinction. After all, if modern humans could absorb Denisovan genes, why could Denisovans not absorb modern human genes and persist as a separate population? The answer likely comes down to numbers. Modern humans were expanding, their populations growing as they spread across new territories. Denisovans, by contrast, may have existed in smaller, more isolated groups. When a large population interbreeds with a small one, the smaller group tends to be genetically swamped. Their unique traits dilute with each generation until they are no longer distinct. Imagine a village of 100 Denisovans and 1,000 modern humans living in the same region. If they interbreed freely within a few generations, the genetic contribution of the Denisovans becomes a small fraction of the overall population. They do not disappear, but they stop being a separate people. Their descendants identify with the larger group, carry mostly modern human traits, and the Denisovan identity fades into history. Climate change may have accelerated this process. The period when Denisovans disappeared coincides with dramatic shifts in global climate. Ice ages came and went, sea levels rose and fell, and ecosystems transformed. Species that could not adapt quickly enough went extinct. Human populations, both modern and archaic, were forced to migrate, compete for shrinking resources, and adapt to rapidly changing conditions. In such an environment, larger, more connected populations had an advantage. They could share innovations, support each other through hard times, and spread risk across a wider network. Denisovans, if they were more fragmented and isolated, would have been at a disadvantage. A drought that wiped out a small group might be survivable for a larger, more mobile population. A disease that swept through a single valley could devastate a small band of Denisovans but leave a larger modern human population mostly intact. Over time, these pressures would have whittled away at Denisovan numbers until only scattered individuals remained, and those individuals, isolated and outnumbered, would have had little choice but to integrate with modern human groups or face extinction. There is another possibility, one that is darker and harder to prove: violence. When resources are scarce and survival is uncertain, humans have always been capable of terrible things. Modern humans may have actively displaced or killed Denisovans in some regions, seeing them as competitors for the same hunting grounds, the same water sources, the same caves. We have no direct evidence of warfare between these groups, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The archaeological record is silent on many things, and mass violence rarely leaves clear traces after tens of thousands of years. What we do know is that by around 40,000 years ago, the Denisovans were gone as a distinct population. The same is true for Neanderthals, who disappeared around the same time. This cannot be a coincidence. Modern humans were spreading, and everywhere they went, other human species vanished. Whether through interbreeding, competition, violence, or some combination of all three, the result was the same. Homo sapiens became the last humans standing. But the Denisovans did not go quietly into extinction. They left behind something that could not be erased, their DNA. And in that DNA is a record of their existence, their adaptations, and their contribution to the human story. Every person of Melanesian descent who carries 5% Denisovan genes is a living testament to their survival. Every Tibetan who can climb a mountain without struggling for breath carries a Denisovan gift. The Denisovans are extinct, but they are not gone. This is the strange paradox of extinction in the age of interbreeding. A species can vanish entirely and yet persist in fragments, scattered across the genomes of its descendants. The Denisovans have no country, no culture, no living representatives, but they are in us. And as long as humans carry their genes, they have not entirely disappeared. Still, something was lost. We will never know their language, their stories, or their beliefs. We will never see the tools they made, the art they might have created, or the rituals they performed to make sense of a world that was vast and unforgiving. We will never hear their voices or see their faces. They are ghosts in the truest sense, present but untouchable, known but unknowable. And perhaps that is the saddest part of the Denisovan story. They were real. They lived full lives, faced the same struggles we face, loved and lost and fought to survive. but history has erased almost everything about them except the faint genetic shadow they left behind. We are connected to them in the most intimate way possible, through the very code that makes us who we are. And yet we will never truly know them. But science is relentless, and the search continues. Every year, new techniques are developed, new sites are excavated, and new fragments of the past are uncovered. Somewhere out there in a cave or a riverbed or a forgotten corner of Asia, there may be more Denisovan remains waiting to be found. A skull that could reveal their face, a grave that could tell us how they mourned, a campsite that could show us how they lived. Until that day comes, the Denisovans remain what they have always been, a mystery wrapped in DNA, a ghost population that challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution. They were not a footnote in our history, they were a chapter, a vital one, and their absence from the fossil record does not diminish their importance. If anything, it makes them more compelling, because the Denisovans force us to confront the limits of what we can know and the vastness of what we have lost. They walked beside us, interbred with us, and then vanished, leaving only the faintest trace. And in that trace, we see a reflection of ourselves. Fragile, adaptable, and always struggling to survive in a world that offers no guarantees. The Denisovans may be gone, but the questions they leave behind are very much alive. And as we continue to search for answers, we are reminded that the human story is far stranger and far richer than we ever imagined. The story of the Denisovans is still being written. Every few years, a new discovery emerges that reshapes what we know, adds a new piece to the puzzle, or raises questions we never thought to ask. The finger bone that started it all was just the beginning. Since then, the handful of Denisovan fossils has grown slightly, each one precious, and each one revealing something unexpected about these ghost humans. The teeth found in Denisova Cave were the first clue that Denisovans were physically different from both Neanderthals and modern humans. They are large, with thick enamel and unusual root structures. In fact, they are more similar to much older human species, the kind that lived hundreds of thousands of years before Denisovans walked the earth. This archaism, this retention of ancient traits, suggests that Denisovans may have evolved in isolation for a very long time, preserving characteristics that other human lineages had lost. Then came the jawbone from Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau, discovered in 1980 but not identified as Denisovan until 2019. It took decades and advances in protein analysis to confirm what the bone really was. The jawbone is massive, robust, and powerfully built. It suggests an individual with a strong bite, large teeth, and facial features that would have been striking, even imposing. But the most remarkable thing about this jawbone is not its size, it is where it was found. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the most challenging environments on Earth. At over 10,000 feet above sea level, the air is thin and oxygen is scarce. Most humans struggle at that altitude, yet this jawbone proves that Denisovans were living there at least 160,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived. They were not just surviving, they were adapted, thriving in an environment that should have been hostile to them. And the genetic legacy of that adaptation, the EPAS1 gene, is still helping Tibetans live at high altitude today. But fossils are only part of the story. In recent years, scientists have turned to ancient DNA, not just from bones, but from the environment itself. Sediment from cave floors, riverbeds, and archaeological sites can preserve genetic material for tens of thousands of years. By extracting and analysing this environmental DNA, researchers have been able to detect the presence of Denisovans in places where no fossils have been found. Denisova Cave itself has yielded layers of sediment rich with Denisovan DNA, proving that they occupied the site repeatedly over thousands of years. But the technique has also revealed Denisovan presence in other locations across Asia, expanding the known range of these ghost humans far beyond the handful of fossil sites. This is a revolution in archaeology. Instead of waiting to find bones, scientists can now search for the genetic shadows left behind in the dirt, and the DNA itself keeps revealing surprises. Analysis of the Denisovan genome has shown that they were not a single homogeneous population. There were at least 2, possibly 3 distinct Denisovan lineages, genetically different enough from each other that they may have been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. One lineage interbred with modern humans in Southeast Asia and Oceania. Another may have lived in Siberia and contributed genes to East Asian populations. A third, even more mysterious lineage has been detected in the DNA of some modern populations, but we have no fossils to match it to. This means that when we talk about Denisovans, we are not talking about a single group. We are talking about a collection of related populations spread across vast distances, adapting to different environments and evolving independently. They were as diverse as modern humans are today, and yet we know almost nothing about that diversity. We cannot see their faces, trace their migrations, or understand how they differed from one another. But the most haunting discovery of all came from the Denisova Cave itself. In 2018, scientists announced that they had identified a bone fragment belonging to a girl who was half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. This single individual, who lived around 90,000 years ago, is direct proof that these groups were not isolated from each other. They met, they interbred, and the boundaries between them were far more fluid than anyone had imagined. This girl, nicknamed Denny, is one of the most extraordinary fossils ever found. She represents a moment frozen in time, a child born from 2 lineages that had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. What was her life like? Did she grow up in a mixed community, or was she an anomaly, the product of a rare encounter? Did she have siblings? Did she survive to adulthood and have children of her own? We will never know. All that remains is a fragment of bone and the genetic story it tells. And that story keeps getting more complicated. In 2021, researchers announced that they had found Denisovan DNA in modern human populations that did not match the Denisovans from Siberia or the Tibetan Plateau. This suggests yet another Denisovan lineage, one that lived somewhere in Asia and left no fossils behind. The genetic signature is there, a faint trace in the DNA of people living today, but the source population has vanished completely. How many Denisovan groups were there? How far did they spread? How different were they from one another? These questions remain unanswered, and with every new discovery, the picture grows more complex. The Denisovans are not a single mystery to be solved. They are a web of mysteries, each one leading to more questions. But perhaps the most profound revelation is what the Denisovans tell us about ourselves. For most of modern history, we have thought of Homo sapiens as unique, separate, the pinnacle of human evolution. The Denisovans shatter that narrative. They show us that we are not the product of a single lineage that outcompeted all others. We are a hybrid, a blend of multiple human species that came together in the distant past. Neanderthals contributed to our genome, Denisovans contributed to our genome, and there may be other ghost populations out there, still waiting to be discovered, whose genes we carry without even knowing it. We are not pure, we are a mosaic, a living testament to the fact that for most of human history, there were multiple kinds of humans walking the earth. And when those groups met, they did not always fight. Sometimes they cooperated, sometimes they fell in love, and sometimes they had children, and those children carried forward the legacy of both parents. This is a humbling realization. It means that every person of non-African descent carries within them the genetic echoes of humans who were not quite like us. We are the descendants of a great mixing, a blending of lineages that took place across tens of thousands of years. The Denisovans are part of that story, and their absence from the fossil record does not diminish their importance. If anything, it makes them more essential to understanding who we are. Because in the end, the Denisovans remind us that human evolution was not a clean, linear process. It was messy, chaotic, and beautiful in its complexity. Species diverged, reunited, and blended together in ways we are only beginning to understand. And the Denisovans, more than any other group, embody that complexity. They are the ultimate ghost in the machine, invisible but undeniable, absent but ever present. The search for the Denisovans is not over. It may never be over. Every excavation, every genetic analysis, every new technique brings us closer to understanding these mysterious humans. But even if we never find a complete skeleton, even if we never see their faces or know their names, we have already learned something profound from them. We have learned that we are not alone in our ancestry, that our family tree is far larger and stranger than we ever imagined, and that the ghosts of the past are still with us, written into the very fabric of our being. The fire still burns, just as it did for our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago. But now, as we sit in its glow, we know that the hands that first tended that flame were not all the same. Some belonged to Homo sapiens, some belonged to Neanderthals, and some belonged to Denisovans, the ghost humans who walked beside us, loved us, and left pieces of themselves behind when they vanished into history. So the next time you look in the mirror, remember that you are looking at more than just a modern human. You are looking at a living library of ancient encounters, a genetic tapestry woven from multiple lineages that converged in the distant past. The Denisovans are in there, somewhere, hiding in the code. And though we may never meet them face to face, we carry their legacy forward with every breath we take. They are the ghosts we never saw, but they are ghosts that refuse to disappear. And in the end, that may be the most important discovery of all, because it means that no matter how much time passes, no matter how thoroughly a people vanish from the earth, they can still leave a mark that endures, not in stone or steel, but in something far more permanent, in us. The Denisovans shaped the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. Their genes helped some populations adapt to high altitudes, resist certain diseases, and thrive in environments that would have killed others. But their legacy goes deeper than individual traits. They changed the trajectory of human evolution itself, proving that interbreeding between different human species was not only possible, but advantageous. Think about what that means for a moment. For generations, the story of human evolution was told as a tale of competition and replacement. Modern humans left Africa, encountered other human species, and out-competed them into extinction. It was survival of the fittest in its rawest form. But the Denisovans, along with the Neanderthals, have rewritten that narrative entirely. Instead of replacement, we see integration. Instead of one species dominating all others, we see a blending, a fusion that created something stronger than any single lineage could have been alone. The traits that helped Denisovans survive in the highlands of Tibet were passed on to modern humans, giving them the tools they needed to colonize some of the most challenging environments on Earth. The immune system variations that Denisovans carried were absorbed into modern populations, helping them fight off diseases they had never encountered before. This is evolution through collaboration, not just competition. And it suggests something profound about what it means to be human. We are not the product of a single pure lineage that conquered all others. We are the result of countless encounters, exchanges, and minglings that took place over hundreds of thousands of years. Every population that modern humans encountered left its mark, and those marks became part of who we are. But the Denisovan story also reminds us of what we have lost. Imagine the knowledge that disappeared when the last Denisovan died. They had lived in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, adapting to climates and environments that modern humans were only beginning to explore. They knew the land, the animals, the plants. They had developed survival strategies, tool-making techniques, and cultural practices that were uniquely their own. All of that vanished when they were absorbed into the modern human population. We will never know what stories they told around their fires. We will never hear the languages they spoke or see the art they might have created. We will never understand their spiritual beliefs, their social structures, or the ways they made sense of the world around them. Every Denisovan who died took with them a lifetime of experience and knowledge that can never be recovered. And when the last Denisovan disappeared, an entire way of being human vanished with them. This is the tragedy hidden within the genetic success story. Yes, Denisovan genes survived. Yes, they contributed valuable traits to modern populations. But the people themselves, the culture, the identity, the lived experience of being a Denisovan, all of that is gone forever. We have their DNA, but we have lost their humanity. And yet, even in their absence, the Denisovans continue to teach us. They teach us humility. They remind us that Homo sapiens was not inevitable, not destined to be the last humans standing. For most of our history, we were just one of several human species, no more or less deserving of survival than the Neanderthals or the Denisovans. We succeeded not because we were inherently superior, but because of a combination of luck, adaptability, and the willingness to absorb the strengths of the people we encountered. They teach us about the complexity of identity. What does it mean to be human when the boundaries between different human species were so fluid? When a child could be born half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. When modern humans could have children with Denisovans and those children could thrive. The rigid categories we like to impose on the past do not hold up under scrutiny. Humanity has always been a spectrum, a web of interconnected lineages rather than a straight line, and they teach us about the limits of what we can know. The Denisovans are a reminder that there are vast gaps in the historical record, entire chapters of human history that have been erased by time. We have a handful of bones and a wealth of genetic data, but the lived reality of these people, what it felt like to be a Denisovan, is forever out of reach. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, there are some things we will never recover. This is the bittersweet truth at the heart of the Denisovan mystery. We know they existed. We know they mattered. We know they shaped us in ways that still echo through modern populations, but we will never truly know them. They are ghosts, and ghosts, by their very nature, cannot be fully grasped. Still, the search continues. Archaeologists are excavating new sites across Asia, looking for more Denisovan remains. Geneticists are refining their techniques, extracting DNA from smaller and smaller samples, pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Paleontologists are re-examining old collections, wondering if any of the unidentified bone fragments sitting in museums might belong to Denisovans. Every year, the possibility of a major discovery remains. What would it mean to find a complete Denisovan skeleton? It would revolutionize our understanding overnight. We could finally see what they looked like, reconstruct their faces, understand their bodies. We could compare their anatomy to ours and to Neanderthals, tracing the evolutionary changes that made each lineage unique. We could study their bones for signs of injury, disease, or adaptation. A single complete skeleton would answer 1,000 questions. But even if that day never comes, the Denisovans have already given us something invaluable. They have forced us to reimagine human history. They have shattered the myth of human purity and singularity. They have shown us that the human family tree is not a ladder, but a web, tangled and interconnected in ways we are still trying to untangle. And they have reminded us that the past is far stranger, far richer, and far more complex than any simple story can capture. So we remember them. These ghost humans who left almost no trace but changed everything. We remember them in the DNA of Tibetans climbing mountains, in the immune systems of Pacific Islanders, in the genetic diversity that makes humanity resilient and adaptable. We remember them in the questions they have left us, the mysteries that keep scientists searching, the gaps in the record that remind us how much we have lost. And perhaps, in some small way, we honor them by continuing to search, by refusing to let them fade completely into the darkness, by insisting that their story matters even if we can never know it in full. Because the Denisovans were real. They lived, they loved, they struggled, and they survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They were human in every way that mattered, and though they are gone, they are not forgotten. The fire that warmed their hands is the same fire that warms ours. The stars they looked up at are the stars we see tonight. The earth they walked is the earth beneath our feet. We are separated by tens of thousands of years, by the unbridgeable gulf of extinction, and yet we are connected through the genes they passed down, through the adaptations they gifted us, through the simple fact that we share a common ancestor and a common world. The Denisovans are ghosts, but they are our ghosts. And as long as we carry their DNA, as long as we search for their remains, as long as we ask questions about who they were and what they meant, they will never be completely gone. They will remain what they have always been. A mystery, a shadow, a whisper in the genetic code. The ghost humans we never saw, but who are with us still. And maybe that is enough. Not to satisfy our curiosity, not to fill in every blank in the historical record, but to remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves. That we are the inheritors of a long, tangled, beautiful lineage that stretches back into the mists of deep time. That every person alive today carries within them the echoes of countless ancestors, some fully human as we understand it, and some who were human in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The Denisovans walked this earth. They faced the cold and the dark and the endless struggle to survive. They made tools, built fires, raised children, and passed on their knowledge to the next generation. They adapted to mountains and jungles and frozen tundra. They interbred with our ancestors and left pieces of themselves behind. And then, quietly, they vanished. But in vanishing, they left us with a gift, the knowledge that we are not alone in our ancestry, that the human story is richer and stranger than we ever imagined. That evolution is not a simple march toward perfection, but a messy, chaotic dance of divergence and convergence, of separation and reunion. The Denisovans are gone. but their legacy endures, written into the DNA of millions, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. They are the ghost humans we never saw, and they are proof that even in extinction, even in the complete erasure of a people from the face of the earth, something can survive. Not a name, not a culture, but a genetic signature, a whisper, an echo. And in that echo, we hear the voice of our shared humanity calling to us across the abyss of time. The implications of the Denisovan discovery extend far beyond the academic halls of universities and research laboratories. They challenge us to reconsider some of the most fundamental questions about what it means to be human. For centuries, we have drawn sharp lines between ourselves and other species. We are human, they are not. The boundary seemed clear, fixed, and absolute, but the Denisovans blur that line until it almost disappears. When we look at the genetic evidence, when we see that a child could be born with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, when we understand that modern humans interbred freely with at least 2 other human species, the question becomes inescapable. What exactly made someone human in the ancient world? Was it biology, culture, the ability to make tools or control fire, or was it something more fluid, more flexible than we have ever acknowledged? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is that humanity was never a single fixed thing. It was always a spectrum. The Denisovans were human. So were the Neanderthals. So were Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis and all the other branches of our family tree that walked the earth before us. They were different from us in some ways, yes, but the differences were not absolute. They were variations on a theme, expressions of the same fundamental drive to survive, to adapt, and to make meaning out of a chaotic world. This realization has profound implications for how we think about diversity today. If the ancient world was home to multiple human species that could interbreed and produce viable offspring, then the differences we see among modern human populations are vanishingly small by comparison. The variations in skin color, facial features, and body types that have been used throughout history to justify discrimination and violence are nothing compared to the differences between a Denisovan and a modern human. And yet, those ancient humans found ways to coexist, to cooperate, and to blend their lineages into something new. We are the proof that it worked. Every person alive today is a testament to the fact that different human groups came together rather than destroying each other completely. Yes, there was conflict. Yes, some groups went extinct, but the genetic legacy tells a story of integration as much as competition. And that legacy, written into our DNA, carries a message that feels increasingly relevant in a world still struggling with questions of identity and belonging. But the Denisovans also remind us of our own fragility. They were successful for hundreds of thousands of years, adapted to some of the most challenging environments on Earth, and genetically robust enough that their traits are still valuable today. And yet, they are gone. Extinction is not reserved for the weak or the poorly adapted. It can claim anyone given the right combination of circumstances: climate change, population pressure, disease, competition, or simply bad luck. Any of these can tip the balance from survival to disappearance. Looking at the Denisovans, we see our own possible future reflected back at us. We are the dominant species on the planet now, just as they once dominated their corner of the world. But dominance is not permanence. The archaeological record is filled with species that seemed unstoppable until they stopped. The Denisovans thrived for far longer than modern humans have existed as a distinct species, and still they vanished. What makes us think we are immune to the same forces that erased them from the earth? Perhaps that is the most important lesson the Denisovans have to teach us. Not about the past, but about the present and the future. We live in a time of rapid environmental change, of shifting climates and ecosystems under stress. The challenges we face, resource depletion, habitat loss, the sixth mass extinction, are not so different from the challenges that ancient human populations faced. And if the Denisovans, with all their adaptations and all their success, could not survive those challenges indefinitely, then neither can we assume our own survival is guaranteed. But there is hope in the Denisovan story as well. They may have gone extinct as a distinct population, but their adaptations lived on through interbreeding. The genes that helped them survive at high altitude were too valuable to lose, so natural selection preserved them in the Tibetan population. The immune system variants they carried were advantageous, so they persisted in Southeast Asian populations. In a very real sense, the Denisovans did not entirely fail, they transformed. This is evolution at its most fundamental, not a linear progression towards some ideal form, but a constant reshuffling of traits, a testing of what works and what does not, a blending and separating and blending again. The Denisovans were part of that process, and so are we. We are not the end point of evolution. We are just another step, another variation, another experiment in what it means to be human. And who knows what the future holds? In 100,000 years, will there still be Homo sapiens walking the earth? Or will we have evolved into something new, something different enough that future scientists would classify us as a separate species? Will we have interbred with whatever other intelligent life forms we encounter, whether on this planet or beyond it, blending our genetic legacy with theirs the way our ancestors blended with the Denisovans? These are not idle questions. They go to the heart of what the Denisovans represent. They are a mirror, showing us that the human story is not one of isolation and purity, but of connection and mixture. They are a warning, reminding us that even successful species can vanish if they cannot adapt to changing circumstances. And they are a mystery, one of the deepest and most compelling in all of science, because they force us to grapple with the limits of what we can know about the past. The search for the Denisovans continues in laboratories around the world. Geneticists are sequencing DNA from ancient bones, looking for new lineages and new clues about how these ghost humans lived. Archaeologists are excavating caves and rock shelters across Asia, hoping to find more fossils that can put flesh on the genetic skeleton. Paleontologists are developing new techniques to extract information from the tiniest fragments of bone, pushing the boundaries of what can be learned from material that previous generations would have considered useless. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture is coming into focus. We know now that Denisovans were widespread, that they were diverse, that they interbred with multiple other human species. We know they adapted to extreme environments, from frozen mountains to tropical islands. We know they contributed valuable genetic traits to modern populations. We know they existed for hundreds of thousands of years before vanishing into the genetic landscape of Homo sapiens. But we still do not know what they looked like. We do not know what languages they spoke or what stories they told. We do not know how they organized their societies, what gods they worshipped, if any, or how they made sense of their place in the world. We do not know if they created art, though the lack of evidence is not evidence of absence. We do not know how they felt about the modern humans they encountered, whether they saw them as enemies, allies, or simply other people trying to survive in a difficult world. These are the questions that keep researchers searching, the mysteries that drive the field forward, because every answer leads to new questions and every discovery reveals how much we still do not know. The Denisovans are endlessly fascinating precisely because they are so elusive. They are real enough to touch in the DNA of living people and the fragments of bone in museums, but distant enough to remain forever out of reach. In a sense, they are the perfect ghost story, grounded in hard science, supported by undeniable evidence, and yet wrapped in mystery and unanswered questions. They are proof that the past is not a closed book, that there are still chapters waiting to be discovered, still stories waiting to be told, and they remind us that the human experience is far richer, far stranger, and far more complex than any single narrative can capture. So we continue to search. We dig in caves and analyze sediment. We sequence genomes and build family trees. We use cutting-edge technology to peer into the deep past, hoping to catch a glimpse of these ghost humans who shaped our ancestors, and, through them, shaped us. And with every new discovery, with every new fragment of bone or strand of DNA, we come a little closer to understanding who the Denisovans were. But we will never know them completely. That is the tragedy and the beauty of the Denisovan story. They are close enough to touch, but too far away to see clearly. They are in our blood, but not in our memory. They are part of us, but separate from us. They are the ghost humans we never saw, and they always will be. Yet, in their absence, they teach us something profound. They teach us that the past is not dead. It lives on in the present, in the genes we carry, in the adaptations that help us survive, in the diversity that makes humanity resilient. They teach us that we are not the first humans to face an uncertain future, and we will not be the last. They teach us that extinction is real, that it can happen to any species no matter how successful, and that the only way to avoid it is to remain adaptable, flexible, and willing to change. And perhaps most importantly, they teach us humility. We are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are not separate from or superior to the other human species that came before us. We are their descendants, their inheritors, and in some cases, their genetic repositories. We carry them forward, whether we acknowledge it or not. And in doing so, we honor their memory and their struggle. The Denisovans are gone, but they are not forgotten. They live on in the high plateaus of Tibet, in the islands of the Pacific, in the jungles of Southeast Asia. They live on in the laboratories where scientists work to unravel their genetic secrets. They live on in the museums where their precious few fossils are preserved for future generations to study. And they live on in stories like this one, in the telling and retelling of their mystery, in the questions we ask and the wonder we feel when confronted with the vastness of what we do not know. So the next time you climb a mountain and feel your breath come easy at altitude, thank the Denisovans. When you fight off an infection with an immune system shaped by millions of years of evolution, remember that part of that system came from them. When you look at the diversity of human faces and bodies and cultures, recognize that some of that diversity has roots in ancient encounters between different human species. The Denisovans are woven into the fabric of who we are, invisible threads in the tapestry of human existence. They are the ghosts in our genetic machine, the shadows in our family tree, the mystery that will never be fully solved. And in their ghostliness, in their elusiveness, they remind us that the universe is full of things we will never completely understand, that uncertainty is not weakness, but wonder, that mystery is not something to be feared but embraced. The Denisovans walked this earth for hundreds of thousands of years. They faced challenges we can barely imagine and survived in conditions that would kill most of us within days. They adapted, evolved, and thrived. And then they vanished, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their existence. But that trace was enough. Enough to prove they were real. Enough to show they mattered. Enough to change everything we thought we knew about human evolution.